path of the Fool is a portal. It's a portal in, and it's a portal out of the tarot. It is a portal in, and it is a portal out of number itself. When you think about the fact that 0 is, in effect, a non-number being represented as a number. We know this because if you divide by 0, it will, of course, collapse the entire mathematical system. So much so that computers are programmed now to detect the operation of division by 0, and instead of attempting it, will give you an error message immediately. Because if they were to attempt it, they would never stop spinning their wheels. And this is a interesting place to start when we're talking about the Fool, because here we have a paradox, a fundamental paradox. It's a card that represents, in a very real sense, its own absence. So it's a contradiction in terms. It's like the word silence. The word silence is not, nor can ever be, what it points us towards. And similarly, the Fool, or the 0 of the deck, is an indication of an outside. And it's not just an outside of the deck, it's an outside of language itself. Because if we followed the thread of the tarot all the way up through the magician who has built a house of cards, if you will, a multi-tiered, multi-layered theater of meaning, it's all dependent on sense. And fools, as is well known, are completely senseless. And it's interesting that we talk about sense in this sense, as opposed to in the other sense, where we sense something. Because the Fool seems to be senseless yet pure sensation. The Fool is sensational and senseless at the same time. And if these don't make any logical sense, then so be it, because that is a exemplification of the nature of this path. So we're going to talk a little bit about wander through this final interval in the study of tarot, this place where in a sense we let it go. I remember I had a book called The Portable Dragon, which was a Western person's guide to the I Ching. And what it was the I Ching hexagrams and a whole series of quotes from Western culture pertaining to them. And it was okay. It was made in the 60s. It's better to get a proper I Ching. But I remember what was interesting about it was the cover of the book said, "Pick up this book, read it, and throw it away." And this ethos of picking up the tarot, reading it, and then throwing it away is it's a very kind of a Zen thing to do, the burning of the Buddhist statues, the iconoclastic turn. And it is an iconoclastic card. Fools will often destroy in an act of whatever you want to call it. Some would call it liberation, others would call it folly, but fools have a tendency of erasing culture, erasing everything up into the moment of their pure consciousness. So it's an extremely volatile card. Like all the cards, we initially see some as good, some as bad. The Fool has had a very mixed history of interpretation. Just realizing I've placed one of these decks. I haven't fished out his fooliness yet, but we can do that. So I can show you the range of fools, because on the one sense this is a child, this is innocence. So in that sense, it's an absolutely essential card. It represents the querent, the person who does not have the answer. So if you look at the trifecta of deck, reader, and querent or sitter, the Fool is the sitter, the Magician is the reader, and the Priestess is the deck itself. And these are, of course, the paths that lead into Kether on the Tree of Life. So yeah, you can see the three paths connecting to Kether are the Fool here. Sorry, the Fool here. I get a mirror image in the camera. So the Fool, the High Priestess, and the Magician. So the Magician connects understanding in the crown. The High Priestess connects beauty in the crown, and the Fool connects wisdom and the crown, which implies obviously mysticism. It implies a state of awareness beyond intelligence as we understand it, a kind of overwhelmedness by the open nature of what is witnessed, of wisdom, of the crown itself. And unlike the Magician, who operates within a closed system, the Fool has left the building. The Fool has begun to dwell in the wilderness beyond conceptuality as we understand it. And in that respect, of course, the Fool is a card with very volatile aspects. Madness is clearly a part of the Fool path. Folly, madness, and innocence are all entangled here. I think it's fair to say that there's twin aspects to the Fool. We could call them ill-dignified and well-dignified. And we all know what is meant by this. A poorly dignified Fool is usually somebody who is entrenched in their folly in a way that they think that it's wisdom. The well-dignified Fool is open. The well-dignified Fool is the symbol, the best thing you can be. It is the full openness to learning, to exploration, to the divine. It is the absolute best quality that the tarot can evoke. And the ill-dignified Fool is the absolute worst quality that can be evoked. And sometimes it's simply a matter of arrogance versus humility. The openness, the realization, the almost Socratic wisdom that we are dwarfed by the sheer vastness of what there is to learn, puts the Fool into this blessed kind of relationship to the whole, where the Fool can learn. The opposite, where the assumption is made that the end of the process has been reached, produces a contentious individual who is impossible to teach. Every martial arts school knows that the people who come in with the proverbially empty cup have earned it. The empty cup is a difficult state to reacquire once we have been socialized. Once we've received an ego, it's hard to actually rediscover what every infant has, which is an empty cup. But with that comes the ability to learn. In most martial arts schools, there are spates of people who come in to show off their knowledge, and they don't usually stick around very long because they don't learn very much, because they know everything already. So attaining this empty cup is in a way the crown of the tarot. So in this path, the great opportunity is to literally dissolve the boundaries of self, to dissolve the boundaries of other, to release the superposition of control, and to release it into an infinite horizon. Which is why, of course, we carefully practice the balance as we move through the paths, carefully cultivating a balance. The Fool and Justice are extremely well connected to one another. The Justice is the 11th trump, and the Fool is the 11th path on the Tree of Life. Also, the word Al, or El, is a Hebrew holy name. Its total is 31, and it signifies a special relationship of openness to the experience of correction, because the Aleph, which is the letter assigned to the Fool, and which has a value of 1, means ox, and the Lamed, which is the letter assigned to the Justice, means ox goad. So the goad is basically the stick or the whip for poking the ox to get it go in the direction it needs to go. And it is the instrument by which the ox learns. And so the Fool learns through pain. And the amount of pain that the Fool learns through is directly proportionate to how foolish the Fool is. Because, in effect, we have this picture. You can see this absolutely famous picture. I'll bring it a little bit closer. Produced by Pamela Coleman Smith for under the guidance of Arthur Edward Waite. This is an image of a presumably kind of looks like a noble, a nobleman, right? Looks like someone who's taken a great deal for granted. A youngster with a bag containing presumably their possessions, a white rose, a red feather, and they're about to stroll off a cliff and presumably to their doom or injury. And yet there is a white dog, a little white dog, and dog spelled backwards is God. An innocuous circumstance that he may or may not end up ignoring that will alert him to what he's about to experience. So there is a kind of it could collapse, pardon the pun, in either direction. You know, the wave function of the Fool could blithely stroll off the cliff, or he could become alert to what the dog is suggesting to him and find another way down. So there's that almost indeterminate nature of the event. If you're actually reading and this card comes up, I would say that there's an indeterminacy to the event. It hasn't been written yet. It's very sensitive. It could collapse into any one of a number of different states. And so this is where balance is key, because it's much more likely to collapse into an undesirable or unhelpful state if there are other functions of the self that are out of whack. And so what we want to do through the practice of balance and through the practice of regular invocation, regular meditation is to mitigate the severity of the fool's pain. Because insofar as we are existent, there will be pain. There will be these course corrections from the universe. And our attitude towards them has a lot to do with what the ultimate trajectory of our experience is. Okay, so what have we talked about? We've talked about division by zero, collapsing the number system, therefore making measure meaningless, which sounds great, but it has an effect very similar to the human mind, to schizophrenia, especially if there are if there is an incompleteness to the mystical release. So, for example, if there's elements of the psyche that cannot release, and other elements that do, a half state can be produced, which results in a divided consciousness. And schizophrenia means divided mind. There was quite a study made of schizophrenia and its relationship to economics, believe it or not, in Deleuze and Guattari's 1,000 Plateaus. And it's a super serious subject because mental illness is absolutely in no way desirable. It suggests, and it can manifest in numerous different ways, but it suggests a real tragic misunderstanding of the process of release. So this is why I suggest a very, very slow and effectively conservative and thorough approach to esoteric gnosis or esoteric knowledge, because excessive and impatient forays into the occult very often lead to psychosis of some sort, right? So the ego can inflate. I mean, we see this a lot where people start to claim the identity of, they claim various different identities which they can't really live up to. So-called Jerusalem syndrome occurs when people often who go to Jerusalem come back and they have a breakdown and they become a character from the Bible. And this, of course, completely disables them in terms of functioning in reality. But the mystic who succeeds is not dysfunctional in terms of the world that other people are living in. Perhaps they are transparent to it, but they are able to release all of it equally. So the well-dignified fool who has attained this extremely blessed state can walk almost invisibly through the world without disaster. As the I Ching says, or the Tao Te Ching says rather, the sage can walk through the battlefield or step on the tail of the tiger because they have no death spot. They have attained to Tao. The poorly dignified fool, who is almost always a product of arrogance, will have will suffer until they discover the root of that arrogance and they release it. In any event, the illness of schizophrenia is very, very tragic and devastating, and should not be flirted with or taken lightly, or valorized. It is an incomplete, a partial, an unbalanced type of gnosis that is something that is very important to do everything within one's power to avoid. Here is a passage from A Thousand Plateaus, which I don't have time to explain as a book, but it refers to what they call a body without organs. And what's a body without organs? What is the body if it has no organs? It's a pure intensity, a pure topos that in a way has no specialized, is the body considered prior to all specialization. So the fundamental commonality, in a sense, of that supplies a site for a being to form. So in other words, the divine itself, in a way, is what they would call a body without organs. And what they are talking about is a process of encountering this body without organs, this Tao, if you will, and doing so in a way that is fruitful rather than disastrous. In other words, how to cultivate genius in the folds of the Tao, rather than court madness. And I'm going to read a reasonably long passage from A Thousand Plateaus, from the plateau or chapter entitled, How Do You Make Yourself a Body Without Organs? You have to keep enough of the organism for it to reform each dawn. And you have to keep small supplies of significance and subjectification, if only to turn them against their own systems when circumstances demand it, when things, persons, even situations force you to. And you have to keep small rations of subjectivity in sufficient quantity to enable you to respond to the dominant reality. Mimic the strata. You don't reach the body without organs and its plane of consistency by wildly de-stratifying. That is why we encounter the paradox of those emptied and dreary bodies at the very beginning. They had emptied themselves of their organs, instead of looking for the point at which they could patiently and momentarily dismantle the organization of the organs that we call the organism. There are, in fact, several ways of botching the body without organs. One either fails to produce it, or one produces it more or less, but nothing is produced on it. Intensities do not pass or are blocked. This is because the BWO, or the body without organs, is always swinging between the surfaces that stratify it and the plane that sets it free. If you free it with too violent an action, if you blow apart the strata without taking precautions, then instead of drawing the plane, you will be killed, plunged into a black hole, or even dragged towards catastrophe. Staying stratified, organized, signified, subjected is not the worst that can happen. The worst that can happen is if you throw the strata into demented or suicidal collapse, which brings them back down on us heavier than before. This is how it should be done. Lodge yourself on a stratum, experiment with the opportunities it affords, find an advantageous place on it, find potential movements of deterritorialization, possible lines of flight, experience them, produce flow conjugations here and there, try out continuums of intensities, segment by segment, having a small plot of new land at all times. It is through a meticulous relation with the strata that one succeeds in freeing lines of flight, causing conjugated flows to pass and escape and bringing forth continuous intensities for a body without organs. Connect, conjugate, continue, a whole diagram. as opposed to still, signifying in subjective programs. We are in a social formation. First, see how it is stratified for us and in us and at the place where we are. Then descend from the strata to the deeper assemblage within which we are held. Gently tip the assemblage, making it pass over to the side of the plane of consistency. It is only there that the body without organs reveals itself for what it is. Connections of desires, conjugations of flows, continuum of intensities. You have constructed your own little machine, ready when needed to be plugged into other collective machines. Carlos Castaneda describes a long process of experimentation. It makes little difference whether it is with peyote or other things. Let us recall for a moment how Don Juan forces him first to find a place, already a difficult operation, then to find allies, and then gradually to give up interpretation, to construct flow by flow and segment by segment lines of experimentation, becoming animal, becoming molecular, etc. For the body without organs is all of that, necessarily a place, necessarily a plane, necessarily a collectivity, assembling elements, things, plants, animals, tools, people, powers, and fragments of all of these. For it is not my body without organs. Instead, the me is on it, or what remains of me, unalterable and changing in form, crossing thresholds. So if this, on first reading, seems stunningly impenetrable, let me just give you a few points. So what are the strata? The strata are the enfoldings of discrete meaning. In other words, what does the magician do? The magician stratifies. The magician labels, organizes, stratifies. The plane is the totalizing horizon upon which strata themselves are made possible. So the body without organs supplies the site for the organs to be assembled. And instead of a point of view that is based on subjects perceiving objects in a kind of fixed regime of if you will, apprehension and representation, what this is a picture of is the utterly depersonalized relationship of awareness of different orders of density to the totality. And it is fundamentally the boundaryless totality, if you will. It is fundamentally dynamic, and it flows through all representations that are erected to display it. In other words, the wind that is the fool is what the breath that animates the entire tarot. This is why this is a card depicting something beyond the tarot itself. It's the Ruach Elohim, or the Ruach HaKadosh, I believe, the holy breath which animates all of the cards, all of them, and at the same time opens them to an extraordinary, all-commensurating plane, which, as Deleuze and Guattari have pointed out, is not productively encountered by a dualistic approach of discarding the stratifications that particularize us. In other words, it is through allowing the divine to penetrate or to breathe through these stratifications without negating them, that the entire state of affairs becomes a kind of an ecology or a loop or a continuous dynamic system beyond name and form. And so, wow, this is quite a thing to ponder. And in fact, it is the ultimate essence of this entire exercise. and I dare say any spiritual or philosophical system will at some point converge on this fundamental yet inexhaustible truth. And for every encounter with this truth, there are 1,000 ways of expressing it, all of which are easily misunderstood. So, in a sense, it truly is the case that the end is beginningness, is discovering the beginningness, and the Tanakh, the Hebrew Bible, begins with the word Bereshith, which is translatable as with beginningness. And really, the Fool, in its truest sense, is the fundamental and ongoing fountain of beginningness that we can encounter, that simultaneously uplifts and annihilates the we, the I, the self, and recontextualizes the entire state of affairs. So that's the Holy Fool. That's the zero that allows the breath of the Ein Sof, or Tao, to animate this this circuitry. Wow. Okay. So what else can we talk about? The Fool is paradoxically the lowest and the highest, and it's a card that points to that to which cards cannot point to. So it's a paradox. In a way, it is what it is not. There is, of course, a strong relationship between the Fool and the world, because these are an Athbash pair, an Aleph and Ta, spell the word eth, which means essence. The sum total of 0 and 21 is 21, and as you know, all the Athbash pairs that we have explored in this course hold this same fundamental relationship. So 21 being the sum total of each of the 11 pairs. You're beginning to see how everything in a way flows into this basin. And it is proper, I think, to say that the entire reality of the tarot is summed up in the relationship of awareness to the continuum. And these two cards become one card. The cards themselves point to the impossibility of separating the two, the mind and the body. As we have seen with a Klein bottle, the inside is the outside and the outside is the inside. There is a beautiful little gematria that I'll give you for those of you who are playing the gematria game. Aleph, spelt in full, Aleph Lamed Pei, is famous for totaling 111. So Aleph totals 1, and Aleph Lamed Pei, its full extension, totals 111. This is an extraordinary and beautiful gematria. 111 pops up in a number of interesting places. For one thing, it's 37 times 3, and 37 has a lot of neat properties. It's a star number, and so on. And it also shows up on the magic square of the sun, which is the numbers between 1 and 36 arranged on a square, so that all the horizontals, verticals, and diagonals total to 111, and the complete array totals to 666, which of course can be applied to the mystery text in the Gospel of, not the Gospel, rather the Revelation of John, the last book that was included in the canonized version of the Christian Bible, the Book of Revelations, the spooky book. But it's an apocalypse in that it's filled with these sort of revelatory mystery images, and the 666 comes up in that. But interestingly, there is a connection to my favorite number here. So for one thing, so this is how we're going to go here. This book here, okay, so David Allen Hulse's book, The Western Mysteries and the Eastern Mysteries. These two books are they are imperfect. They are sometimes the product of having read not the world's greatest sources, and yet at other times they gather together such an incredible collection of useful material that it is a very valuable text to have, as long as you keep a certain amount of skepticism involved. It has phenomenal chapters on the Enochian, has phenomenal chapters on Hebrew, and just incredible collections of data. So it's a good condensation of stuff. And one of the things it contains is a detail of the 231 gates of wisdom. The 231 gates of wisdom. You can also read about this in Aryeh Kaplan's translation of the Sefer Yetzirah. The 231 gates of wisdom are all the possible permutations of the 22 Hebrew letters with one another, excluding doubling and reversals. So Aleph Bet, Aleph Gimel, Aleph Daleth, all the way to Aleph Ta, and then Bet, Gimel, Bet Daleth, and so on. And so each set, of course, has one less permutation than the others. So it is naturally going to be the sum of all the numbers between 1 and 21, which is 231. So think of the Tetractys, think of the what I've continuously been saying, the fact that 1 plus 2 plus 3 plus 4 plus 5 plus 6 is 21. Well, now I give you this. 1 to 21 is 231. So the 231 gates of wisdom are a systematic permutation of the letters of Hebrew in using an algorithm so that we can have a first member, a second member, a third member. You know, there is a how do I say it? It's not randomly put together. We can put it in an ordered list and know what the 111th gate of wisdom would be, which leads me to the following. Let's find out what the 111th gate of wisdom is. Well, look at this. It's Vata. So that's interesting. So 111th permutation is the letters Va and the letters Ta. Now you could turn these around, right? You can reverse these. It could be Ta and Va, which is interesting because you would spell the word Tau, Ta, Va. Ah, well, isn't that cool? All right. Well, here's where we're doing a little bit of gematria. The Vav can be spelt in full, and the Vav spelt in full is quite simply Vav Vav. So it's one of the letters that, in a way, produces itself infinitely. So what we have here is Tau, Tau Vav, and so Ta is spelt Ta Va, and Va is spelt Va Va, which means if you spell Tau with all the letters complete, so Tau Va, Ta Va, sorry I said Tau, Ta Va, Va Va, you have Ta Va Va Va. In other words, 400 plus 6 plus 6 plus 6. So that would be 418. So as you know, I am a great fan of the number 418. It is Makashana, it is Palith Athena, it is Amorah Ha'onam, it is Abra Hadabra, it is Rahur. It is quite central to my alchemical approach to the tarot. And in this final path, it dissolves like an ice cube in the eternity. So just plunk, and there it goes. Tau Va, in its fullness, is the 111th gate of wisdom. The Fool and the World. So, for those of you who got something out of that, and some of you are probably like, wow, okay, let's talk more symbolism. Okay, so yeah, the Fool is a wilderness outside of language, and in that respect, it returns us to our, in its senselessness, it returns us to our senses. So there is a great deal of literature on the Fool, and one of the greatest writers is the Russian literary theorist Bakhtin. Wrote a book called Rabelais and His World. And so Rabelais is, if you're not familiar, is a late Renaissance satirist, novelist, storyteller. He was a priest who spent a lot of time in pubs with the folk, and he brought the word Thelema and the Abbey of Thelema and Do What Thou Wilt. He was the first person to write it. I have my copy of Rabelais kicking around here. Rabelais is hilarious. It's filled with scatological humor and cod pieces and fart jokes. Everything that the austere magician is not. The flatulent, ridiculous, drunken, obscene fool is. And in Rabelais, or in Rabelais, you have this kind of congenially natured, noble debauchery. And for Bakhtin, this is ultimately about the porous, about overcoming this idea that the self is a hermetically sealed kind of envelope and dissolving into the continuum in which we are found. In other words, through vomiting and pissing and shitting and farting and eating, we segue into the material body of eternity, but post the dichotomy between material and ideal. This dichotomy doesn't even exist, so the material and the spiritual are, in a sense, commensurated in this fundamental flux. So this teeming body without organs, if you will. And so Bakhtin talks about Rabelais, and really you should read Rabelais, especially if you're involved in any way with Thelema. It's the source of Thelema, and it'll put a whole different perspective on things when you read it. But and it's funny as hell. And this is a card that this is a path that juxtaposes itself to a magician as humor juxtaposes itself to the serious. And if you've seen a magic show and a pure magician like a David Copperfield, who does it, he plays some clown, I won't lie, but he's considered a very kind of a serious gentleman style magician. His magic depends on success, right? We go to see the magician succeed. We go to see the magician be powerful. But why do we go see a clown? We go see a clown be weak. We go see a clown recover from insane hardships. You know, Roadrunner and Coyote. That's a pretty esoteric depiction of the twin sides of the Fool, complete with the whole running off the cliff bit. But we go to see a clown fail and recover from failure. And it's easier for a clown to recover from failure than a magician to recover from failure, because the way the clown is oriented to eternity is such that their selves are not exalted above the audience, above. They are in a sense simultaneously everyone, and this is probably what makes them much more frightening than magicians. Their fundamental relationship to chaos, to Tiamat, is obvious, and of course the monster clown thing. But the art of clown has saved many a magician. I won't lie. Being able to be funny, being able to play clown, is an elastic quality that is almost universal to good showmanship, in my personal opinion. And you see it even in very serious performers. You see hints of the clown. The fool's resilience in regeneration is almost a result of this continuous debasement. And so by debasement, we mean a kind of continuing, well, sort of blasphemous audaciousness married to purity of intent. And if you've heard of the Feast of Fools, it occurred around what we call Christmas time now, or Saturnalia. Feast of Fools was celebrated. Well, Saturnalia was celebrated by the Romans, but the Feast of Fools was celebrated by monks in the early and medieval Catholic Church, and they would parade an ass into the nave of the church and give it the sacrament. And this was banned at the end of the medieval period, but it was this holy blasphemy that served an iconoclastic purpose. It's quite similar to, as I alluded to before, the Zen monks who show up at the monastery and they're like, we don't have any firewood. Okay, I'll just take this image of the Buddha and we'll burn that. If you see the Buddha on the path, kill him, right? That's the famous koan. Koans, of course, are used to transport us out of logical thinking and into the perception or apperception of this paradoxic plenum that the fool exposes to us. And if you read the work of David James Smith, it's also quite interesting. It very, very much deals with the Ein Sof and with what he would say, the 0 equals 1, the fundamental inseparability of somethingness and nothingness. And of course, 0 is the fool's trump number, and 1 is the Aleph. So this system has 2 numbers assigned to each of the cards, creating a chain or cascade that moves through the entire series, right? 0 becomes 1, so the fool becomes the magician, like overlapping links in a chain, becomes a priestess, becomes the empress, becomes the emperor, and so forth, all the way down the chain because of this displacement by 1, 0 and 1. However, there is a indistinction between mind and body at this level. We no longer talk about mind versus body. So we can talk about the flesh of the world as the continuum of dynamic forces and dynamic reality. And we can use a word, we can introduce a word here called diaphany, which is transparency. And the fool should make the entire series completely and utterly crystalline and transparent. So at this stage, it in a way goes beyond magic with its colors, black and white and red and green, into colorlessness, into clarity, into this awesome, all-penetrating, diaphanous open. And that is what can be found eventually through this path. But this path is not to be tarried on for the same reason that I read you that passage, because it has, we develop a relationship with it over our lives. And yet, I find every time that I encounter this particular card, I would make sure that you double check everything you do this week, because it's easy to lose things for some reason. It's easy to make oversights. It's easy to be so blown away by the kind of magnitudinous ocean of eternity that we lose our individuality or distinctiveness, which is the vehicle of our operation in this plane. And so we embrace the paradox that non-duality must include duality within itself. Otherwise, it's just plain old duality. If it excises duality from its body, it is no longer non-dual. So non-dualism must include dualism, and so we return to our dualism with a strange kind of skew added to it. A refreshing breeze, if you will, that enters into that and doesn't so much wildly collapse it as subtly transform it and open it to new options, like this holy wind breathing, respirating through the conduits and elevating this whole picture to where it never left, which is eternity. Dispelling an illusion that's deeply rooted in our sense of self. Remember, the self is one assemblage on the body of eternity among myriad. So we perceive this with the Fool. And the dichotomy of arrogance and innocence, the doorway, the egg of eternity, it's always hatching. And I wrote here the fool's freshness decays. Of course, the initial openness of folly, of innocence, gets one chance in any given kind of circumstances. You get one, I don't know this, I am unfamiliar. And then the question is do you learn? If you don't learn, then you're repeating if you're giving an opportunity to learn but you don't take it, then what happens is you're doubling down on folly. And the freshness of folly then starts to become rotten. And so this is why that the horizon of the Fool has to always move. Right? The moment you learn something, you're basically being asked to apply that knowledge. And the famous definition of madness is doing the same thing over and over and over again and expecting the same results. That's basically a result of continuously going off the cliff because you don't want to talk to the dog. You don't want to go another route. So this incredible sensitivity has to be cultivated. In a way, it's the most important card of all, because for every folly that we produce in our lives, and there are countless, we are responsible for finding a way of correcting it, and which will produce more folly, which will then require more correction. And so that is the Fool in balance, continuously playing one another out. And yet that's how we evolve and learn, and that's what keeps us open. And the moment that ceases, then we stagnate, and then we calcify, and then we form a shell around ourselves. So the key here is to not let that shell form. So remain actively on the horizon of eternity. Remember, we looked at the lovers there too. That active engagement with the horizon, which turns us into the portal through which eternity enters the world, and ultimately the world versus eternity and the portal and all that dissolves into what was always there in the first place, which is pure expressive activity. And in this place, cause and effect collapses, miracles and madness, an astonishing overwhelmedness by the unbounded nature, and yet remember the paradox, of course, is that yet we remain. The true clown is a survivalist in the wilderness of eternity. This is not other than that wilderness. So this gives us, in a way, we can look at Gilgamesh, right? Enkidu and Gilgamesh. Enkidu, who is drawn out of wildness and into the world by Gilgamesh. I would say the fool would be Enkidu, and the magician is Gilgamesh, if you've read that tale. But here we get a sense of the wild man. It's the source of continual renewal. Basically, as long as that horizon is dynamic, as we're continuously learning on that threshold where the fool encounters the world, then it's a continuous and eternal fountain of renewal. And it's only when we retreat from that threshold through some contrivance or other that we cease to partake of the waters of the fountain. And I think I've covered most of what I wanted to say, except I suppose that when you see a clown play, a clown has been famously called a collector of moments. But what I've noticed about clowns and clown magic is they have a stunning amount of sympathy and rapport. The relationship of the fool or the clown to the audience is one of deep sympathy, so that when the clown feels something, the audience also feels that. Just as when you see a mime, properly do mime. I'm not properly doing mime. You have the sensation of these illusory objects that the mime is creating. That level of rapport and empathy is a result of the collapse of the boundary between self and other. And so I feel the last thing that I want to discuss, because I realize this is a little bit longer than some of the other videos, but it's the final video in the series, and I want to give you some things to think about. Is the fool's relationship to the hermit. So this is a Kabbalistic connection more than anything else, and it's because the fool is Aleph and the hermit is Yod. And the most obvious relationship is Aleph is 1 and Yod is 10. Or Yud. So 10 is the fully expressed monad, and 1 is the seed of that monad. So in essence, the seed and the tree, which produces the seed and the tree. So that, as they say, Kether is in Malkuth. And that is the great mystery. And so this plays out with the fool and the hermit. And you can see the fool has this staff that he's not really using all that well. He's got it over his shoulder. The hermit has put it to use. The hermit is the fool after having learned. So in other words, the fool who is arrogant never becomes the sage. doesn't get the opportunity to unfold completely. To draw from David James Smith, there's a real dynamic where Aleph, he calls it the doubling property of Aleph. Whenever you say Aleph, Aleph doubles. Aleph is never less than 2, famously. I think this comes from the 13th century text, mystical text, the Fountain of Wisdom. And the doubling property of Aleph is that when saying Aleph, it produces a reflection of itself. So you get 2 Alephs. But as soon as you have 2 Alephs, you have 4 Alephs. But those 4 Alephs are part of a singularity, which is a 5th Aleph. So right there, Aleph turns into 5. And this is, of course, the letter He in Tetragrammaton, which itself doubles, and that He becomes 2 He's, which we see in Tetragrammaton, Yod He, Vav He, and they're the same He. So the He is now expressing, so it's all Aleph. It's all Aleph. Everything's made of Aleph. And so that's how David James Smith will show how, in a sense, the hermit, the world is a folding of the same continuous fabric of eternity. There is no break in the process. And so the equivalency of the fool, who is of course the horizon of potentiality, and the hermit, which is the intensive singularity, or the Aleph and the Yod, are like the center and circumference of the circle. They cannot exist without one another. It's inconceivable. The fool and the hermit are absolute and essential co-implied quantities, co-implied qualities. And so we see the fool learning from their errors, and we see the sage providing a lamp to guide the fool. So this really is what initiation is about. It is about passing through life experience and then sharing that. So this is just the generational transmission of wisdom. And that's what the tarot is about. That's what the oral tradition that conveys itself through the tarot is. That is the ultimate task and the ultimate secret of this course, of this program, which is keep learning. Continuously keep learning and share that learning. And we can look at some of these pictures. I like this fool from the Visconti Sforza deck. He's basically, he's got feathers in his hat. He's got his staff up over his head, and he's pretty much got his schwein hanging out. He's got his diaper down, if you will. This guy is unpresentable, and bad footwear, inappropriate footwear for the terrain. That's one thing to notice about the hermit, especially in this deck, is that he has appropriate footwear. We see this also in this version of the Marseille. And here we have the dog, but this is a wolf this time, and it's exposing his butt. It's ripping his pants. That's a theme that shows up quite a bit in the Solabusca, which I don't have time to cover in this course because it's so different, deviant even. This idea of he's carrying he's carrying a big sack of jumbled up possessions, that plays out quite well here in Crowley's. And Crowley has and this is straight up Dionysus, the god of spring, and he's being bitten by a tiger. There's erotic and drunken aspects to it, transformation. Everything is a mix and a mingle. But up here you have oh sorry, here, you have a bag of astrological symbols. So this suggests really all the knowledge of the tarot, the whole tarot in these kind of pentacles, right? They've been objectified and they're stored in a bag and they're jumbled. And he doesn't actually really understand them. They're not in his heart. They're physical objects. They're much like a deck of cards before you really know how to read it. So their material objectivity in its I guess, his jumbled state hasn't been unfolded. He hasn't learned it. He's a fool. He's full of potential, right? He's full. Fool is full of potential. And potential is painful. Potential means it has yet to, the potential has yet to be realized. So there's this intense, anxiety around potential. Potential needs to find ways of expressing itself. And so this fool is this incredible pressure. Famously, Dion Fortune wrote that an adept, if ever there was one, once said to me, God is pressure. And I think that was Freud or Jung. But yeah, God is pressure. The pressure to express. And so when we make ourselves conduits through study of this system or another system, through meditation, through openness, then we allow the divine pressure to alleviate itself, to flower. And this is, in a sense, no different than what Deleuze and Guattari are talking about, is removing the obstructions to the flowering, but let the flower form a complete diagram, a complete loop, a complete ecology between eternity and singularity, because like the point and the circle, they are continuous. The spirit of ether. This is another image from the Tarot of the Holy Light. It's a lovely deck, and of course Leonora Carrington's. I'll show you one last, because how can I not? This is Elise Ursa's beautiful blood and ink tarot. And here we have the fall. Always sometimes called the mat. Mat. And so that brings our series of videos to a conclusion. And if you have followed with me through this course, then the discussion supplementing this has probably left an enormous amount of possible lines of flight, deterritorializations, as Deleuze and Guattari would call them, but many new ways of seeing and applying the magic of the tarot, because really that's what meta magic is. It is an approach to the exploration of becoming, of temporality, that is not hung up on what you believe or which specific practices you engage in, but more in your relationship with the open and your ability to experience joy and be a conduit for the expression of eternity, however that expression may manifest. So I will leave you with that thought, and I hope that those of you who have enjoyed this course will see value in joining me again. Knowing now what you know about how the Forest of Life calendar gives us an opportunity to explore and cultivate and grow a forest of life. My name is Dr. Peter Deschemin, And this is Forest of Life Venus Calendar, week 32. See you next time.